For this week's project, we will be making these cool watercolored cityscapes. First, let's talk a little bit about silhouettes. Now, a silhouette is the shadow of a figure that you can see. Now, these occur when the light comes from behind the object instead of in front of it. As you can see here, I have a T-Rex eating a small little car, and I'm going to show you how a silhouette works. Now, this is what it looks like in normal light when light is coming from in front of it. But if we turn off the light and change the light source so that the light is coming from behind it, you get just an outline of the figure. So anything can have a silhouette. Let's check out a few examples in nature. Now that you've seen some examples, let's get our materials out. The materials you will need are your watercolor set, a cup for water, some table salt, a white crayon, a glue stick, a pair of scissors, a single hole punch, and if you have it, some cardstock or watercolor paper, and a black sheet of construction paper. It is also very helpful to have masking tape so that you can tape your paper down and it doesn't curl when we paint it with the watercolor. Alright, now that you have all your supplies, let's get started. For the first step of your project, you're going to need your watercolor set, your watercolor bowl with a little bit of water in it, and your cardstock or your watercolor paper. And you can put the rest of the things aside for now. Now that I have all my watercolor supplies set up, I'm going to take my masking tape and I'm going to tape down my paper so that it doesn't curl when I get it wet. I'm also going to be showing you two different techniques. On this side, I'm going to show you the wet on wet technique, which I get the paper completely wet and then I add paint. And this one, I'm just going to be painting on a dry piece of paper. So just this normal, getting the brush in paint and painting on a dry piece of paper. And we're going to see which one turns out better, and then you can choose which one you want to do for your project. Now that I've finished taping everything down, I'm going to get started on the wet on wet side because it's going to take the longest to dry, and I'm going to need clean water to cover the entire page before I even start adding paint. But before I even start getting paint, let's look at sunsets and sunrises to see what colors we're going to use. From the examples I saw at the horizon lines, it was mainly oranges and yellows going up to blues, greens, and purples as you faded up into the clouds. So that's what I'm going to do for both of these. So I'm going to start with a yellow and an orange on the bottom, and I'm going to move up to darker colors in the sky. So remember, this paper is completely wet and this one is completely dry, and I will be adding wet paint to both of these papers, and we're going to see how they turn out and see which one looks best. I suggest when you're painting these, you start with your light colors first in order to keep your brush clean, and you also want to paint horizontally so it looks like the skyscape. Okay, I have finished painting everything, so you can see what our wet on wet looks like versus our wet on dry. Our wet on dry is a little bit more organized and it has very defined lines. Our wet on wet is a little bit more disorganized. So your last step is to take your salt and you're just going to shake a layer of salt over your paintings. Now, Try not to make too much of a mess, but it's okay. And I'm going to try to zoom in so you guys can see what happens when the salt hits the paint. All right, so I'm going to just do it right here, and I'm going to put some salt down, and you're going to watch what happens to the paint. I've let both these dry for about 15 minutes now, and now I can remove them and set them aside to dry, but I want to lift them up very carefully and not get the salt everywhere. And I'm going to take them either over a waste bin and brush them off, or I'm going to take them outside. It's up to you, but be very careful so you don't get salt all over the place. This is not going to be good for your area. Those weren't quite done drying, so I'm going to set those aside and let them dry, but I'm going to take out my scissors, my glue stick, my 1-hole punch, my white crayon, and my black sheet of paper for the next step of this project. What you're going to want to do is draw an outline of a city, and most cities are made of buildings that are rectangular, so this is quite easy to do. What you need to do is you need to take your white crayon and you need to draw a line with different shapes of blocks coming out of the center line. So something like this. And it doesn't matter because buildings are all different shapes and sizes, so some are big and fat, some are tall and skinny, and you can make all different shapes. Some buildings even have a roof like a house. So you can draw that in there. Like so. Once you're done with that, you can put little dots in where you think windows might go. This will help you in the next step. So you can put as many dots as you want if you want a lot of windows, or if you only want a few, you can put just a few. Some windows in here, put some windows right here, some windows here. All right, the next step is you want to take your scissors and you're going to cut it around your white line. Now that I have the silhouette of my city cut out, I can take my 1-hole punch, and where I've made dots that I wanted windows, I can hole punch out those dots. I want to be careful not to go too far over, too close to the edge, but I can come from the edge and punch holes for windows. I'm pretty happy with that, and I don't want to put in any more windows, so I'm going to clean up my space and I'm going to check and see if my watercolor is dry. Now that these are completely dry, let's take a closer look and see what happened. So, on our wet on wet piece of paper, you can see the color is all over the place, it bled in different areas, and the salt left this very interesting texture. And on the wet on dry piece of paper, the color is much more concentrated and evenly spread, and it has more control. And the salt did the same texture technique on this one. Now, for your next step, you're going to need to take out your silhouette and we're going to glue it to our piece of paper. So I grab my silhouette and now I have to choose which one I want to do. But lucky for me, I have 2 silhouettes, so I can do both. Alright, well, I'm going to get them glued down, and that's the end of your project, so I hope you enjoyed this project. And until next time, bye!